Yeah, so let's take this conversation further. The case of Janusz Walusz, who was serving a life sentence for the murder of South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani, was recently before the Portfolio Committee on Correctional Services. His release, of course, sparked debate after he said in an interview that if given the opportunity, he would repeat his actions. So tonight we're asking, do you think the parole system in the country is failing victims of crime? We're keen to get your views via WhatsApp on 072-110-5584 or give us a call on 010-594-6010. Really looking forward to getting your thoughts. Let's discuss this, of course, now with Correctional Services spokesperson, Mr. Singabako Ngumalo, joining us via video link. We have prisoner rights activist, Mr. Miles Budu, in studio with us, and UNISA's associate professor in the Department of Correctional Management, joining us also via video link, Mr. Professor Thabiso Mataba. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I do actually want to start with Prof. Mataba on this one, because I think that what I want to do is not take for granted that South Africans all remember Francis Rasuge and how important and big of a moment this was for South Africa 2 decades ago. At that time, I think so many South Africans knew her name because for many years we simply didn't know where her remains were. Just perhaps talk to me about what you remember around this particular issue and the moment that it was for South Africa going back 20 years.
Thank you very much, Naledi, and good evening to your viewers and Mr. Miles Budu and Ntate Ngumalo. Ntate Nkuna was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2005 for Constable Rasuge's murder. As we indicated, the remains were found 12 years later at Nkuna's home during the time where they were doing a construction of laying a foundation. Nkuna is already served 20 years incarceration. And then by the virtue of the Law and Correctional Services Act, he was being considered, not granted, considered for parole as inmates are eligible after serving minimum required time in incarceration. And the sad part of the whole story, Nkuna still stuck to the story of the hitman. And no decision has been taken yet on the issue of the parole process, which means that there are steps that need to be followed for him to consider the issue of parole.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that was, thank you so much for just, I suppose, laying the groundwork there because, yeah, Francis Rasuge, my goodness, that story gripped so many South Africans. Where are we now, Mr. Ngumalo, in the process of him being considered for parole, the work that's being done? My understanding is that the family of Francis Rasuge has had some meetings wherein I believe the sister of Rasuge collapsed during one of those dialogues, struggling to deal with the process. Where are we now with it?
A very good evening, and thank you for having us. I think what's important to explain is what the Prof, I think, laid down for all of us. Section 73 of the Correctional Services Act, that all inmates, after serving the minimum required time, are eligible to be considered for parole placement. That doesn't guarantee that they will be placed out. There's a process that needs to unfold. And that process differs when you look at people who are sentenced to a determined period, like a particular number of years, and those who are sentenced to life. The process is much more prolonged and quite vigorous for those who are sentenced to life because your profile, yes, like all others, will start with the case management committee at a correctional facility, move to the parole board. But for a lifer, it then moves further to another structure called the National Council for Correctional Services, which is a body of experts. These are independent people, gets to be chaired by a judge from the High Court. There will be other specialists, psychologists, and members from the community and other bodies like such as your NPA and others. From there, it then goes to the minister, who must then make a final decision. With Mr. Nkuna, his profile was submitted the first time, and he was given what we call a feather profile. Let me just explain what's a feather profile. Is to say you are not a candidate yet to be placed out because these various bodies may have picked up that other interventions ought to be made for these people not to be a risk out there in the community. They will then make those recommendations. When the minister makes a final decision, we'll say further profile and then also highlight these other interventions that must be followed. So with Mr. Nkuna, those were clearly stipulated. So he's been busy with those interventions. Also, party to that, victim offender dialogue needed to happen. This is technically restorative justice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to talk about what happened in that specific room because we always say a victim offender dialogue cannot be a once-off session because it's highly emotional, many things go in there. Hence, we leave it to specialists to look after that particular process because it is where the victims of crime get to meet the perpetrator. They will have questions. They are looking for answers. And people react differently. Some may feel that they are ready to face with the perpetrator, but once they are there in that room with the perpetrator, things may change.
Yeah.
So those are some of the dynamics that you find in there. But once the process has started, it must proceed up until, eventually it comes to an end. So I wouldn't want to say this is where we are now, but to say his profile is being looked into, his doing these other programs that were identified until such time that he will then be taken back through all these stages that I've mentioned for another decision to be made, whether to be placed out or another decision to say other interventions again must be undertaken.
Yeah, okay. I mean, so it is quite a lengthy process. Mr. Budu, I want to bring you in here because Mr. Nkuna talks about the victim offender dialogues. And I think that that's where South Africans really start to struggle, right? When Rasuge's family needs to sit in front of a person like William Nkuna, who for 12 years would not come out with where her remains are. That must be difficult for the family, and South Africans really not being comfortable with this idea of even having a discussion around parole. What do you make of it? Is it time? Is it simply his rights and South Africans need to accept it?
Thank you very much for having me. You see, the Department of Correctional Services and the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development should have done this thing right from the beginning. They had 30 years to do that. Let me elaborate. You know, in 2005, various organizations were called from all over the country to discuss the creation of a victims' rights charter. You must have heard of the Freedom Charter. Now, the Victims' Rights Charter, we spent almost 3 days there at St. George's, at taxpayers' monies. And we engage with intellectual scholars, we engage with academics and researchers. And we came out of that conference with a document that was finalized, called the Victims' Rights Charter. Now, the Victims' Rights Charter, the majority of South Africans don't even know that there is such a document.
Well, what is it about?
It's like the Freedom Charter, you know, that when you are a victim, the state from day one must be there with you up to the bitter end, and then you end up with this victim-offender dialogue. Now, you see, the victim-offender dialogue is at the tail end of it all, you know, and the victim-offender dialogue, we regard it as a fee where the Department of Correctional Services want to look good. We want to know from them what happened with the Victims' Rights Charter, because the Victims' Rights Charter should have been incorporated in the Constitution by now.
Right, but this is what I'm trying to get, Mr. Budu. What does it put on the table? Is it saying that these dialogues of victim-offender dialogues should start much earlier? Is that essentially what you're saying?
No, it says that when you are a victim, the state must financially assist you, medically, accommodation. It must make sure that the case goes until the bitter end and the victim is there, or the family of the victims are there throughout the whole process. And that Victims' Rights Charter should have been a constitutional thing so that the rights of prisoners is embedded in Chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights, Section 35, subsection 2, paragraph E. Nowhere in the Constitution would you find a chapter, a section, a subsection, and a paragraph of the victims. And they went into a conference many years ago talking about the victims. I thought that I must bring these documents here so that people must not think I'm speaking out of my eyes, my nostrils, and my ears. It says that's resolution number 4, that government and civil society will strengthen victim empowerment initiatives throughout offender rehabilitation. It's not happening. You only see them with a VOD when a person that is supposed to be recommended for parole, then they bring this VOD. Now they have concocted something as VOM, victim offender mediation. They had enough time to do it. 31 drawn out years. These papers, they use it as dormant. It's their own documents. And the Department of Correctional Services, I met the minister and I said, listen, Minister, you don't know nothing about correctional services. Here is the document. Start here.
Right. Okay, there's a lot for us to go through because essentially now Mr. Budu putting on the table that at some point he feels that there is an abandoning of the victims throughout the rehabilitation process. How do we get that right? And I want to look at a few examples of what we have had in South Africa. Once we have had an offender released on parole, just how well do authorities do in keeping a close eye on those offenders that are reintegrated back into our communities? But let's hear from Katlego in Turfloop. Katlego is called in. Katlego, good evening.
Good evening, ma'am. How are you?
I'm well, sir. Thank you for calling in. Talk to us, Katlego.
Well,
Katlego, we're listening. Go ahead.
okay, I'm saying, according to my view, is that if the court system took a resolute to sentence a person to 15 years, and then the arrested person served the sentence, I think the person is eligible to have the parole. There is no any need to deny the parole because of the person already served the sentence. The least that the country can do is to come with artificial intelligence to ensure that how do we prevent the increase of crime in South Africa. I will give you a typical example. I think it was all over the news where we saw the president went to America to Oval Office with his own delegates. And Mr. Johan Rupert made a proposal that it is best that we can have the intelligence like Elon Musk to come to South Africa.
Okay, so we need to improve our intelligence in how we track what happens to offenders, perhaps even after parole. Thank you so much for calling in. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we look at what happens after parole. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We continue as we analyze the state of the parole system in South Africa. Of course, it's come back into sharp focus after the issue of Francis Rasuge has hit the news rundowns all over the country once again with the consideration of parole for her killer, William Nkuna. We've got some WhatsApps that have come in from our viewers. Let's put those up on the screen and take a look at them. Shai Matlo says, yes, it's failed us because if you don't have money in this country, you'll be charged and serve the sentence. But if you have money, you'll be given parole to serve your sentence outside. Shai, thank you so much for sending in that message. Deboho Tabala says, hi, Naledi and lovely South Africans. Hi, Deboho. It's so nice in this country. People who messed this country like Montana come back and tell us how to fix things they themselves destroyed. How I wish they are not given space in the media. Kumnandi. Okay, thank you so much for that, Deboho. Annabelle says, oh gosh, going to prison in South Africa is like going on holiday because with no time, you get parole. Shame. Prof. Machaba, I want to bring this issue to you. There was the story of a young girl, 8-year-old Tasne van Wyk. You may remember her. Her murderer, and if you go back to that story, you'd remember that her murderer was someone who was out on parole and in fact had not seen a parole officer in about a year. So let's talk about what we need to get right once we have released an offender on parole, the work that needs to be done there.
Okay, thank you very much. You know, we are having a problem in South Africa, starting from the criminal justice system. Let me take you back. Interpretation of life sentence for many families means life in prison. In other words, many families, they don't have an understanding that after a specific period of time, this particular individual will be eligible for parole. That is why most of the family, they resist victim offender mediation process, because their thinking is that this person will never get out. In terms of the parole system of South Africa, the parole system of South Africa is problematic. If the parole system in South Africa was effective, there was no way that we can have estimated 80 to 94% of people who are reoffending in South Africa. In other words, the approach that we are using regarding the parole system in South Africa is a medical approach, whereby we are with the opinion that inmates are sick. There's nothing like a sick person will brutally kill someone and failure to tell the family where is the body of particular individuals. In the case of Nkuna, at the end of the day, these people have to undergo the programs. Inmates are aware that the only way for them to be eligible for parole is to attend programs. Let us look at those programs. We've got psychological programs, we've got social work programs, we've got educational programs, we've got skills development programs. But what I can tell you, what is happening currently in South Africa, there is a lack of psychologists. And the approach that those psychologists are using is generic. In other words, for inmates who committed contact crimes, serious crimes, we believe that they've got anger issue. So we take them to anger management program, which is irrelevant to the deeds that they've done. And in terms of the social work, there is no relationship between the society, the family, and the victim and the victims. That is why I want to agree with Mr. Miles Budu. The department is reacting after many years.
Okay.
And then you have to go back to the family and remind them, yes, that's the situation.
This is such an important discussion, and I wish we had more time. But let's talk about that. Your final thoughts on what we need to do post-parole, because it's equally important, right, that we don't have this. I mean, the Democratic Alliance just a few months ago talked about 36% of parolees in the Cape Flats are reoffending. What do we need to get right there?
The Department of Correctional Services needs to go back to these recommendations. It is 9 recommendations. I only read one into the book. Let me read the last one. That ex-offenders and ex-offenders organizations will partner with government in providing programs that can successfully reintegrate ex-offenders into society. It is their recommendations. The minister know about it because I went to his office in August last year. I spoke with him, I looked him in the eyes, and he gave me the impression that he was going to look into this document, and absolutely nothing happened. And we keep them entirely responsible for going in there, wasting taxpayers' monies and dormant recommendations for the past 10 years. Okay. And we will hold on to these recommendations until sense prevails in those who are running the department from the head office. Yeah.
Mr. Nkuna, your final thoughts. I mean, a lot that's been said. Obviously, there's the work that needs to be done to ensure that even after parole, that we don't have offenders reoffending, and I'd like for you to touch on that. Mr. Machaba talking about the programs that need to be improved where that's concerned. But Mr. Budu made an interesting point earlier around victim-offender dialogues needing to start much earlier, because the rehabilitation is not just for the offender, but there is a sense of justice that is necessary and healing that is necessary for the families of the victims.
Okay, thank you. We do have cases where some of the victims get to be involved in that rehabilitation journey of an inmate, so that they can really attest in saying that indeed this person has undergone rehabilitation and is now a different human being by the time this plays out on parole. But there's one point that I wouldn't want us to miss. People will serve their time, get to be assessed, placed out. But once they're out there, they face a number of challenges. Some get to be rejected by their own communities, even their own families. That is a problem that has to be addressed. Some land in areas where crime is so high. We mustn't really take for granted the issue of gangsterism, what happens in those communities. So what we do as correctional services, we've got a branch called Committee Corrections, where you've got monitoring officials who ensure that compliance is taking place. And should some of those parolees deviate from that, we then take them back. But unfortunately, some of them will abscond. And by the time we arrest them, you find that they've already committed some offenses. Hence, as a department, we've taken a step in saying that we've had the Correctional Services Act for a very long time now. We are reviewing it, but we're also paying particular attention to our parole system. Hence, we've invited everyone in saying that let us look into this review process so that we can have as many ideas as possible, then have one parole regime, which will then respond to all the areas or where people have been really expressing themselves and saying that we are not happy with the way in which parole is administered in this country. That process is ongoing. So people with ideas are welcome to come on board so that as a country, we'll have a parole system where everyone will say, at least I've contributed. And should there be fault lines, we can collectively look into it and see how best we can readjust.
And that conversation needing to happen as you hear prisoner rights activist Mr. Miles Boodoo feeling that there are voices that are not heard. But gentlemen, I do want to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, we have run out. But thank you so much to Mr. Miles Boodoo, prisoner rights activist, joining us in studio. Always a pleasure. Professor Thabiso Machaba, Associate Professor in the Department of Corrections Management at the School of Criminal Justice. And thank you so much to Mr. Singabako Ngumalo there, spokesperson for Correctional Services. You're still watching Newsfeed PM. The late edition. We've got your top stories on the other side of this. Stay with us.